Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Axel Rimbaud, and I will present my result of my thesis on public transport road safety risk for pedestrians and cyclists in the case of Santiago. So the thesis has been done part of my master program from the EIT Urban Mobility Master Program. I did my first year in KTH Stockholm, where I learned about transport data, transport modeling, transport policy evaluation, public transport. And the second year here in UPC, where we learned more about transport policies, and the second semester has been dedicated to writing this thesis. So this thesis has been done for this Movimiento contra el Exceso de Velocidad Letal, a road safety from NGO from Chile. The result should be used by the Public Transport Authority in Santiago de Chile, which is DTPM, Directorio de Transporte Público Metropolitano. So what's the context of this thesis? It deals with road safety, so it's always important to put some figures back on the table. So each year, 1.35 million people die on the roads. Between 30 to 50 million people get seriously injured, and it's globally the first cause of death for children, teenagers, and young adults between 5 and 29. And globally, it's the 8th cause of death. So it has a massive impact on our societies, and it's a really serious issue. So what are the specific risks of public transport buses? So they are heavy vehicles. So even at low speed, crash involving a bus can be fatal. They have a lot of blind spots, so it's really hard for a bus driver to see what's around them and detect pedestrian or cyclists. They have a high turning radius, so they need a lot of space to turn, and they can be dangerous while doing so. And they circulate in an area where there's a lot of pedestrians and a lot of cyclists. So a bit of the history of public transport in Santiago. So in the 80s, the system was mostly unregulated, so people had their own bus and they created their own lines. Then in the 90s, the Ministry of Transport starting regulating the system where bus drivers had to register to the Ministry of Transport. There are some requirements on the bus they had to use, and all the buses were yellow. So this is why they were called the yellow buses. But the bus driver was still independent. So what happened is they were competing against each other. So we had cases where drivers were going as fast as possible to the next bus stop to get the passenger waiting. And usually they were operating with the bus door open to gain some time, and this was dangerous for the passengers. Then in 2005-2007, the new Public Transport Authority started implementing the Trans-Santiago, which is an integrated system. And this system was supposed to remove all those issues with competing between drivers. Then in 2017, they started introducing a new fleet of electric buses. And on top of being electric, those buses were also had better visibility and were safer buses. So they should both bring some benefits as well. Then in 2019, those new buses were integrated into a new standard, which is called Mobilidad, and this standard was having new buses, better safety, but also separating the tender for the bus operation and the bus fleet supply. So now that we know that road safety is an issue and it can be an issue for buses, we want to study and offer solutions to prevent those kind of crashes in the case of Santiago, and in particular for crashes involving pedestrians and cyclists. So we divided this main goal into specific goals. So the first one is to know the impact of public transport buses in Santiago on the road safety of Santiago. Then we want to see what are the elements who make those crashes more severe when there's a crash between bus and pedestrian, then for crashes between buses and cyclists. Then we want to see if female drivers are safer drivers, if they are less involved in fatal crashes. And we want to see also the impact of the policy which have been implemented. So the Trans-Santiago in 2005-2007, and then the red standard rollout which is being done at the moment. Then we want to be able to compare the situation in Santiago with other cities in Chile and in the world, and then see if some strategy or measure could be put in place to improve the situation. So if we look at the literature, there's a big increase in the number of studies related to crashes between pedestrians, cyclists and buses. And this is mainly because many cities are pushing for more active mobility and also more use of public transport. So safety is becoming more and more important. However, there's a big gap in the research in Santiago. There's no study on that crashes between buses and cyclists and buses and pedestrians. And also there's no information about the impact today and what was the impact of the policy put in place in the last 20 years. So most of the study between, which try to look at crashes between pedestrians, cyclists and buses, we use crash severity models. So it's models where they take a list of risk factors, so the speed of the driver, the gender of the user, the road characteristic, and they try to predict the severity of the crash. So those models, severity model, use different type of models. Some of the most frequent ones are logic models, binary probit models, order probit models, and one of the most used is multinomial logic model, where the probability of a crash n ending up in severity I depend on the exponential of the utility of this severity divided by the sum of the exponential of the utility. For the evaluation of the policy, most of the studies are pre-post studies, verifying the difference between before the change and after. However, because the policy of road safety applied to an entire city or country sometimes, it's not always possible to have a control group. So in this kind of situation, some effect that need to be controlled. So some effect could be controlled is the number of kilometers traveled, which is a measure of exposure. It is traditionally believed that there's a linear relationship between the number of kilometers traveled and the number of crashes, but it's not always the case, so this needs to be verified before we use this relationship. Then for speed, speed is a really important factor in road safety. It increases the probability of occurring a crash and also its severity. And this is valid at driver level, but also in average at aggregate level for the average speed. And usually the impact of speed on road safety is either modeled by a bar model or an exponential model. So the methodology used for this study, so the study area is the operation area of the Public Transport Authority of Santiago, which is the 32 municipality of the province of Santiago, plus Puente Alto and San Bernardo. The road crash data are the one recorded by the police, and they've been reformatted by the Chilean Commission for Road Safety. For the 2017-2021 period, we calculated some more information, the user information, crash condition information, crash location information, and the information about the driver involved in the crash. Then for the 2002-2021 period, we look at if the public transport was involved in order to see the impact of the policies. So to describe the data, we use some descriptive statistic. For the road crash severity, we did a chi-square test on each parameter, and we presented the severity of crashes between pedestrians and buses, and then between cyclists and buses. And for each of them, the chi-square test tells us if this parameter has an impact on the severity of the crash. Then to be sure that we have information about those crashes and not general crashes between pedestrians, like normal pedestrian crashes, we compare them with pedestrian crashes with public transport involved or without public transport involved, and we did the same work for cyclists with fatal crashes. And then we compared both two users, so fatal crashes with pedestrians and buses, and fatal crashes with cyclists and buses. And finally, to compare crash rate, we use the test of proportion, and this was used to validate the effect of bus driver gender. So the road crash severity models, so 3 models were created, 3 multinomial logic models for each of those type of crashes, so pedestrian buses, cyclist buses, and total 6 models. And basically we use one where we had all the parameters significant at 10% using the chi-square test, then one with all the parameters at 20%, and then all the parameters. Then to compare the goodness of fit of those models, we use the AAC to compare them. And this was a good comparison tool because those models have different number of parameters, and this metric penalizes when there is more parameters. Then for the road safety policy evaluations, so as I mentioned, we want to evaluate 2 policies, the Trans-Santiago implementation in 2005-2007. So for that, we did a pre-post study on the average number of fatalities on the 2002-2004 period, and then 2008-2012 period. And we use as a control group the number of crashes not involving public transport buses. Then for the red standard rollout, which is happening today, we want to have a relationship between the proportion of new buses and the number of fatalities. And for that, we control for the average speed of buses and the number of kilometers traveled by them. And this was really important because in this period, there was the Chilean protest of 2019 and also the COVID-19 pandemic, which had a big impact on speed and number of kilometers traveled. So this is the model we propose, where the rate of fatalities involving public transport buses is a coefficient times the proportion of new buses plus another coefficient times the proportion of all buses. And all of that is multiplied by the exponential of the speed. So now let's go to the result. So the first really important result is that public transport buses have a big impact on road safety in Santiago. 19.5% of all the fatalities in the study area on the 5-year periods were involving a bus. So it's already around 50 per year, so it's really a big impact. And for pedestrians and cyclists, it's 26%. So it's really, really a big impact. Then if we look at the severity models, we got a lot of results from the models and also the descriptive statistic. But this is some of the most important one. So if a crash for pedestrian and public transport buses crashes, they are more likely to be fatal if a male pedestrian is involved, if the pedestrian is older, if there's an older bus driver, if the bus is restarting, or if the crash occurs at night. Then for crashes between cyclists and public transport buses, they are more likely to be severe if the male is a cyclist, and if the cyclist is a male, sorry, and then they are more likely to be fatal if they occur at night. So an example, a bit more detail of the input we got. So here we see the fatal pedestrian crashes if a public transport was involved or not involved. And here we see the maneuver of the driver at the moment of the crash. So in the case where a bus is involved, the proportion for turning and restarting the bus is much higher than for other drivers. So for buses, it's really important, if we want to prevent crashes with pedestrians, to look at when they turn or where they restart on their bus, on the bus stop. For cyclists, it's really different. So this is a proportion of the maneuver of the bus driver when cyclist fatality happens, and when pedestrian fatality happens. And for cyclists, most of the drivers were driving straight. And this makes sense because in Santiago, the bicycle network is not really complete. And when there's no cycling lane, usually cyclists share the space with buses. And the buses go faster, they're more dangerous because they're going straight. Then for the bus driver gender, so we extended a bit the study period to 2014, where we had data on the number of bus drivers gender. And in this period, 3.9% of the drivers were women, and they were only involved in 1.49% of the pedestrian fatalities. So this, using the test proportion, tells us that female drivers are 62.8% less likely to be involved in a pedestrian fatality. And this is already a big result from our study, saying female drivers are safer and we should have more of them. Then for the policy evaluation, as I mentioned before, there's two policies that we want to study: the implementation of Santiago and the slow rollout of the new buses. So for the Santiago implementation, there was a big decrease when the policy was implemented, a 35.5% decrease in total fatalities and 77.8% in the bus occupant fatalities. However, in the same time, the number of fatalities not involving public transport buses decreased as well by 19.8%. So if we take that as a control group, we end up with a 19.5% decrease in number of fatalities and a 72.3% of bus occupant fatalities decrease. And this is also like a big result where we show that Santiago at road safety level had a positive impact. For the red standard rollout, as I mentioned before, the first thing to do is to see if there's a linear relationship between the number of kilometers traveled and the number of fatalities. So this was done with on the 2008-2016 period, where with the linear regression, which gave us a really good result with 0.98 adjusted R squared. So we assume that there is a linear regression relationship between the two, and this is the rate of fatalities per kilometer traveled by buses. So in the pre and post period, there was a 47.6% decrease in the number of average fatalities, but the rate of fatalities only decreased by 26% when we talk about crashes involving buses. And it's important to note that there was no change for other users. So for crashes not involving buses, there was no changes. So as I mentioned, we creating a model controlling for bus kilometer travel and average speed. So this is the formula we got from our calculation. And the model fits very well the data. So we get, here you can see the predicted value and the actual value, so they are really similar. And we get R square of 0.95. However, this seems to be to overestimate the effect of the bus standard rollout. Because if we put 100% of the new buses, we get an 85% decrease in the rate of fatalities, which is really big. So it makes us believe that other factors might have played a role, like the impact of COVID might have been different for buses than for other users, the impact of the Chilean protest as well. In the same time, some new bus lanes were put in place. There was an increase of female drivers, which has positive impact on road safety. The bus operators have been more professionalized, they have certified themselves in some ways, and the maintenance of the Santiago buses, so the whole system, was improved as well. So this partly answers question 6, where we see it seems like there's an effect of this new standard, but we can't estimate what the effect exactly is. Then we compare Chile with two other cities in Chile, Greater Concepcion and Greater Valparaiso, which are the second and third biggest city in the country. And those cities have a public transport system which is similar to Santiago before the implementation of the Transantiago. So there is competing between drivers, the doors can be open, and the number of fatalities in those cities, the proportion of fatalities in public transport buses is higher. So it's 19.5 in Santiago, and those cities is more than 25%. And the same way for pedestrians and cyclists. And actually the rate is also similar, it's also higher. However, the rate for crashes not involving public transport buses is the same, or pretty similar between Santiago and the rest of the city. So the level of road safety is similar, but the safety of buses is worse in both cities. And also there was no reduction of the number of fatalities in Greater Valparaiso. And the proportion of fatalities involving public transport buses in Santiago before Transantiago was similar to those cities. So it makes us believe that if we implement an integrated public transport system in those cities, it will have a positive impact on the road safety. So recommendations, so we propose an approach, a safe system approach to road safety, to propose some measures that could be put in place by public transport authorities to improve safety, using all the results we got from the study, but also using literature on the topic, the experience of other cities. And we propose a safe system approach with 6 pillars: with safe speed, safe vehicles, safe road for all, safe road behavior, post-crash care, and road safety management. And basically the point is to measure for all those pillars to create a safe system. So 22 measures were proposed, and for each of them the stakeholders relevant for Santiago were shown. So I'm not going to go through 22 measures, it would be too long. So I'll just mention a couple which could be interesting. So the first one is on safe vehicles. So safe vehicles is really important in the case of Santiago because there's already implementing a new fleet, and the new fleet seems to have benefits for road safety, and also because the new standard separate the tender for bus operation and bus supply. It will only mean changing the bus supply tender to improve the safety of buses. You don't have to deal with the operators at all. And also in the case of London, so this is a study made in 2018 in London where they look at all the countermeasures which could be put in place to improve bus safety, and 80% of the measures with benefit for road safety were on the vehicle. So vehicle is a topic which can bring a lot of benefits and could be implemented easily in Santiago. And in the case of the study, there were 6 recommendations proposed. Then another recommendation could be interesting is increase the proportion of female drivers. There's already a policy to do that in Santiago, but because we saw that they have a positive impact on road safety, this program should be maintained and extended. And this is the conclusion of my thesis. Public transport buses have a significant impact on road safety in Santiago, but also other cities of Chile. There is a necessity for Santiago and other cities to improve the road safety of their public transport system. The model provided gives some insight on what are the characteristics of those crashes, and also how can they be prevented, and then some recommendation to help public transport operators and authorities are being presented to improve the safety situation. So thank you for your time.